Alrighty, so it is now 1 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get this party started. Thank you all for joining today, and good afternoon. My name is Tyler Herman. I'm co-coordinator for Louisiana Clean Fuels, and today we're going to talk a little bit about some first responder safety as it pertains to alternative fuel vehicles. Some identification, a little bit about Clean Cities and who we are and why we're doing this and why it's important, and then we'll hear from Chris Womak, who's going to tell us a little bit more specifics about how to actually deal with first responder emergency situations whenever we have alternative fuels involved. So I'm going to get started just a little bit of why we're doing this training at all, and then pitch it off to Georgia Seivright, who is with the Coachella Clean Cities Coalition, and she'll talk a little bit about clean cities in the background, and then we'll pitch it off to Chris. So I already mentioned who we are, but those are our titles there. So we'll jump straight into the meat of it. So some of the important things and why we're actually doing this to begin with is kind of a lot of questions they might have for yourselves as first responders and things we need to keep in our minds. You know, can you accurately identify the alternative fuel vehicles? Do you know what you're kind of dealing with whenever you get into these situations? As alternative fuels are becoming more and more popular across the country, they're starting to look a lot like normal vehicles, that it's really important that we know exactly how to deal with them and how to identify them, because knowing what the problem is the first step of actually solving the problem. So some of the questions that we'll hopefully answer to some degree is going to be, you know, what do you do if you have a propane truck getting in an accident with an electric vehicle, which sounds like a unique, terrible unicorn situation, but something that, who knows, might actually happen and you might have to deal with. So I'm going to go through some of the risks and hazards associated with alternative fuel storage, including some of the concerns associated with high voltage batteries and how to deal with them, and high pressure gaseous fuel cylinders for CNG, LNG, propane, and so on. How to deal with the fueling stations. That's a whole separate can of worms. What sort of personal protective equipment you need, the steps for rescuing occupants from a damaged alternative fuel vehicle, how to respond to a fire in these situations, how to respond to fuel leaks. So all kind of different situations that you can imagine getting involved with an alternative fuel. And while you might know how to deal with gasoline and diesel, they have different risks associated with the different fuel types. I always like to say it's not necessarily more dangerous or less dangerous, it's just differently dangerous. And if you don't know what those differences are, that can cause some problems. So I'm going to pitch it off to Georgia Seivright, who's going to talk a little bit about clean cities and what we do and kind of the state of the market.
Thanks, Tyler. Hello, everybody, and good morning, and thank you for joining today's First Responder Safety Training webinar. As Tyler mentioned, my name is Georgia Seivright, and I'm a coordinator of Clean Cities Coachella Valley region. Clean Cities Coachella Valley region in Louisiana Clean Fuels Coalition, we're a part of a broader network of Clean Cities coalitions across the country, and we're part of the U.S. Department of Energy Clean Cities program. We're a group of people that work together for a common cause. We cannot do this alone, so building partnership with others is important to carry out our mission. Next slide, Tyler. Clean Cities have a broad portfolio of strategies to advance affordable domestic transportation fuels and energy-saving technologies. Some of these strategies are listed here. The program promotes the purchase of alternative fuel vehicles and expansion of alternative fuel vehicle fueling infrastructure. Next slide. And okay. Now this slide helps in giving us a sense of how broad the network of Clean Cities Coalition is nationally and where local coalitions are located. Through our collective efforts with our partners, stakeholders, we are able to transform local and regional transportation markets. Participation in Clean Cities is voluntary, and coalitions draw local stakeholders from the private and public sectors. Next. These stakeholders help us to educate the public, collaborate on transportation projects, help identify research needs, and share experiences, information, and resources. Clean Cities Coalition hosts events for stakeholders to share information. We work with fleets to determine the best fuel technology options and collaborate on projects and cut petroleum use. We work to advance alternative fuel use by educating truck drivers and fleet owners, overcoming technical hurdles, and collaborating on transportation projects. Our Alternative Fuel Data Center, AFDC, and fueleconomy.gov websites host an extensive collection of information, data, and tools related to every technology and fuel in the Clean Cities portfolio. AFDC helps with mapping out the different fuel locations across the country, laws and incentives search, the maps and data tools, emissions and reduction calculators, vehicle search, and publication search. Fueleconomy.gov, you can use that site to find a car, compare cars, and get tips to cut fuel costs. Collegiates provide the assistance, information, and resources to successfully plan and execute alternative fuel and fuel infrastructure projects. These activities makes Clean Cities a successful program that it is today. I will turn you back to Tyler so he can give you a brief overview of alternative fuel vehicles, and then he will introduce you to our presenter for today's training. Back to you, Tyler.
Thank you, Georgia. And as she said, I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the alternative fuel identification and just go over some of the different fuel types and kind of show you what to look for on these vehicles. So I mentioned some of this before, but why is this an issue? It's really just because these vehicles are here and they're on the roads and they're in consumers' hands and in fleets' hands. So we're going to have situations where we have these vehicles involved in emergency situations. It's just going to happen more and more as we get these vehicles, more market share on the road. So in Louisiana alone, there are 6,000 alternative fuels on the roads, and there are 13 million alternative fuel vehicles on the road in California. So not too surprising that the difference is pretty dramatic there. But that's a large number of vehicles, and eventually they're going to get in some sort of situation that you're going to have to be able to deal with as a first responder. And identifying them is always the first step. We're getting more and more of these vehicles on the road every year. The growth curves for electric vehicles and natural gas vehicles are pretty dramatic. So they're going to become more and more part of our daily experience. So a lot of the compressed natural gas vehicles and propane vehicles are used in long haul and regional freight. So they're on the roads and going between states and traveling very large distances on our interstate system, and they will need to be accounted for as well. Ports and long-haul truckers are embracing liquefied natural gas, especially becoming important as a marine fuel, and that's having knock-on effects in the ports themselves. Electric vehicles are gaining popularity, as we all know, especially in the passenger market, with Tesla being hugely successful these days, and then a lot of other electric vehicles coming on the market as well and finding a lot of success. And then propane, especially recently, is becoming incredibly popular in school boards due to low cost and low maintenance and kind of high reliability for students. So, and also becoming popular in package delivery fleets as well. So all these different vehicle types are in different customers' hands, and they're growing in popularity kind of across the board. So we're going to go through some of the, here's another set of stats. In Louisiana, CNG is the most popular compressed natural gas, the most popular alternative fuel, with a good mix of propane, some biodiesel as well, and electric vehicles also coming on the road. And then in California, you see the list of important alternative fuels that are really coming into their own there as well. Biodiesel, natural gas, again, electric vehicles, ethanol to 85, propane, and liquefied natural gas as well. So in addition to the vehicles, you also have the infrastructure. So fueling infrastructure has its own set of safety protocol and things to pay attention to. There are quite a few of these stations across the country. In California, there are almost 37,000 alternative fueling stations, which is quite a few. In Louisiana, we have 161. Again, this is as of a couple weeks ago, whenever we got these stats, and those numbers are growing pretty rapidly as well. So knowing how to handle those situations is quite important. So I'm going to go through some of the vehicle types and list them off, and then kind of show you what to look for on the vehicles themselves. So the alternative fuels we're really going to focus on here are going to be compressed natural gas, propane, electric drivetrains, and then the biofuels. So this is a diagram of a Class 8 natural gas vehicle, and you'll notice that the engines and that sort of stuff doesn't look very different, but the main differences come from the fuel tanks on the back. So they're often stacked vertically right behind the cab. Sometimes you have the saddle tanks that are along the side between the wheels, just like the diesel would be. But otherwise, they look quite a lot like normal diesel trucks. So it's really important to make sure that you're aware of the stack behind it. And I've got a couple pictures of actual vehicles on the road as well to show more clearly. But you'll have that stack of tanks. That's where all the storage or all the fuel is stored. And then you have a high pressure lines that go to the engine themselves. Another distinct feature that you'll see on the tanks in a couple slides is that you'll see ports on the side where you have access ports to the tanks themselves for mechanics, and there are some regulations around that needing to be there for ventilation as well. For a hot minute, we had some compressed natural gas in the passenger vehicle market, mainly with the Honda Civic that offered CNG. But this is a good example of, you can see the blue diamond that is required on natural gas vehicles. So that is one giveaway. But as you might imagine on fleet vehicles, those diamonds can get dirty and they might be covered up, and it might be a little bit more difficult to see that. But that is a surefire sign that you're dealing with a compressed natural gas vehicle. And the biggest way to check or to recognize natural gas vehicles would be on the larger vehicles. You'll see those tanks that'll usually be in a vertical stack. And I think on refuse fleets, so I have pictures of as well, you'll have sometimes horizontal stacks that you'll be able to see. And then, of course, a lot of the branding on these vehicles tends to be around the green aspect of it. So you might have more blue stylings and green stylings on the vehicles. And a lot of companies are really nice and just say natural gas on the side, which makes it quite obvious, like the UPS box trucks. So a couple fleet examples that you can see is on the left here, you have Cormark fueling up one of their vehicles at a station. So this is a station actually by Spark where you have both diesel and compressed natural gas because they have a mixed fleet. And then on the left or on the right side, you can see Builder Supply. You actually see the stack of tanks right there with a blue diamond on the side as well. And so that's the sort of stack that you might look for on a CNG vehicle. And all those tanks are stacked vertically there to hold all the fuel at high pressure. And then the refuse fleets, you will sometimes see the stacks vertically of tanks, but these are also another popular configuration where the tanks are actually on top of the bin. And you see those ports that I was mentioning right along there. So this one, the vehicle on the left will have 4 compressed natural gas tanks there. And the one on the right, you can't see the ports because they'd be on the other side, but that probably also has 4 tanks right up here. And then also, just as a point, sometimes on these vehicles, you also see an L-shaped stack of cylinders that'll go over the cab itself. That's, I think it's maybe a little bit less common, but you'll see those as well. And refuse companies are very, very common offenders when it comes to using natural gas. It's very common in those fleets. They work really quite well in the refuse setting. So that's probably one of the biggest markets that you'll see natural gas vehicles being used today. And in some examples from Coachella Valley region, really good mixed sampling here. You have school buses on the top right that are using them, as well as the transit fleets. So you can see this whole bar along the top, those will have CNG cylinders lined up within them along the length of the bus. Same thing with the truck at the top left there. And of course, you see a lot of branding on these vehicles that just tells you straight up that they're natural gas, because a lot of fleets want to brag about that and want to show it off. And then another common example you'll see is UPS driving around. So they also have this stack right behind the bed, right behind the cab of the truck with the cylinders in there as well. And again, so just a sampling of the fleets that we have in both of our territories that use these. You can see there are a lot of refuse, a good number of pickup trucks and vans as well. They have semis, they have refuse trucks, and kind of it spreads the whole gamut. So CNG is kind of finding its way throughout a lot of the vehicle market. And then for liquefied natural gas, it's the same, it's chemically identical or basically identical to compressed natural gas, very small differences, but it's liquefied. So it doesn't need quite as much storage because it compresses it down all the way down into a liquid. And those are done as side saddle tanks that you'll see there, which again makes it look a lot like diesel, but it'll have branding on it. They'll have the diamond that'll say LNG on it so that you can identify it. And then the tanks do look different. They're actually basically thermoses that keep the fuel cold, as opposed to, so it doesn't expand too much and cause problems. And so here's an example of the diamond at the top there. Again, I had that blue diamond with LNG on it, usually near the fuel tank or on the rear bumper of the vehicles. And again, they're often branded with liquefied natural gas on there because companies like to brag about it. And like I said, it can be a lot harder to identify liquefied natural gas vehicles because their tanks really do look similar to diesel tanks. They're stored in the same spot, but they're quite different. And then one thing that's really important to note is that liquefied natural gas also occasionally vents, and this is by design. As the fuel warms up, it does create a little bit of pressure in those tanks. And so they have a resettable valve that'll just bleed off some of that pressure and then close back up whenever it does its job. So that'll occasionally happen even in normal operations situations. So it's just kind of a good thing to be aware of. And here's an example of a liquefied natural gas fueling station. You look at these big stacks that'll hold all of liquefied natural gas. And so they tend to be quite obvious and quite stark. And again, they're branded pretty aggressively. So it should be pretty easy to notice. And so propane vehicles kind of fall into the category with liquefied natural gas where they can be a little bit more difficult to notice. Propane is stored as a liquid, not a gas. So it can be done in much smaller storage containers. And you can see the drivetrain, everything is quite similar to a normal truck. They run on a similar type of engine to a gasoline engine. The drivetrain is going to be most of the same, and it's really that tank that's going to be different. So they have a black propane diamond that should be on the vehicles, again, usually on the rear bumper and or by the fuel tank itself. And then a lot of companies want to brand their vehicles as propane vehicles. Once again, to kind of talk about the environmental efforts that they're going through. A couple of common examples be very much on the school side of things. Bluebird has their Bluebird buses, and the actual bird itself will be blue on propane vehicles. That's always a good sign. It'll say liquefied petroleum gas, which is the same thing as LPG or propane. Usually say that by the fuel port, and then they'll also have diamonds on the back bumper. And then we have a UPS example here in their box trucks that are quite common, and they do both the branding in writing on the back and on the side usually, as well as that diamond that you can see at the bottom right there. And then electric vehicles, this might be the hardest one to identify, apart from the Teslas, which are kind of obvious, because they look a lot like normal vehicles. The drivetrain is totally different. It's an electric motor and a high voltage battery, as opposed to a fuel tank and an engine. They're quiet. They don't sound like normal vehicles at all. So I'm going to have a couple examples of what to look for there. So there are 3 different types of electrified vehicle on the road, especially in the passenger car space. You have the hybrid electric vehicles. These basically have a decent amount of storage and a battery component, as well as electric motors, and they just operate more efficiently than a standard transmission, and trying to get rid of some of those losses. But that includes usually a 1 kilowatt hour or so battery that's often nickel metal hydride, and kind of gives it a little bit more power, but really is used for efficiency. So these are pretty common. I'm sure we all know how to recognize those. It's Toyota Prius, and then a lot of the newer vehicles coming along have hybrid drivetrains as well. The plug-in hybrid sort of the middle ground between fully electric and normal hybrid. So it has a significantly larger battery than in a hybrid, but not quite as large as a fully electric vehicle. And they can drive some distance on pure electricity alone without having to use gasoline at all. So you plug this in at home or plug it in at a public charger and get that extra little bit of range. And these will usually have lithium ion batteries to get some of that extra energy storage versus the nickel metal hydride. And in a fully electric vehicle, this particular example is a Nissan Leaf, and it looks pretty starkly different than a lot of gas vehicles, but a lot of the electric vehicles coming along on the market actually look pretty normal and are good looking cars. So you can't rely on it being a funky looking vehicle anymore to know that it's an electric vehicle. But this will have a large electric battery that can range anywhere from 30 kilowatt hours, which is a ton of energy, all the way up to 100 kilowatt hours. You can get very, very large batteries, and being able to identify them is pretty important. So the charging stations, you can see, well, yeah, you've got some of the plugins. On the bottom right, you have the plug-in hybrid version of the Prius. And so that's just got a wall outlet plug. It's a standard charging outlet. It's a J1772 SAE standard. The top left, you can see another level 2 charger. It's a Clipper Creek. And these just basically look like pedestals that have plugs off of them. There's not a huge amount. You're not going to mistake this for a gas station. And they're usually branded pretty obviously as well. And then here in the bottom middle, that's not a charging station at all. That looks like it's a CNG receptacle there. You can see natural gas only on the cap. So that's the fitting that you'd attach a CNG hose to. I think that may have been put on the wrong slide. And then really with the EVs, you're gonna notice a lot of the badging. So this would be the biggest way to notice them. A lot of blues in the consumer EV market, and especially Volkswagen, Toyota, Lexus. You can see I have all the blue styling within their normal logos to show that it's something different. See a lot of the word eco, hybrid synergy drive, all the sorts of buzzwords. And then, you know, they're pretty recognizable vehicles just because of how new they are. So the top ones to pay attention to are probably no surprise. It's mostly the Tesla Model 3, and now the Model Y is coming along pretty rapidly, the Tesla Model S. But then you get into the plug-in hybrid like the Chevy Volt, and then the fully electric Nissan Leaf. And we have quite a few new EVs on the market. So keeping up with kind of which ones are coming along is a good idea for sure. And it's an interesting industry to watch. And then one of the things that's always love to point to is, just like Georgia mentioned, we have the Alternative Fuel Data Center. It's just the best resource you can think of for alternative fuels. It's absolutely incredible. And they have this wonderful vehicle search. So for any of the alternative fuels that you're interested in, you can do a little search through on the AFDC, and it'll bring you, pictures of the different vehicles, a lot of their specs, and always just kind of a good idea to look through them and sort of see what to look for. So highly recommend going to the site and just giving that a look. And now we're going to hear from Chris Womak about what to do in the situations whenever you come across these. So without further ado, I'll pass it off to you. You are muted.
There we go. There you go. Now I can talk. I'm just testing everybody's ability to read lips. See, that's kind of class it is. So let me get my screen up here, share. I think Tyler can't share mine. There we go. All right. So I will give you a little information about myself. So basically, my name is Chris Womak. I'm a captain currently with the Indianapolis Fire Department. I've been in the fire service for 29 years. I've been in the fire service to start my 25th year. I know I don't look like I've been in the fire service that long, but believe it or not, I have been. During my time with the Indianapolis Fire Department, those of you who don't know much about the Indianapolis Fire Department, if you've ever been to FDIC, that's pretty much, everybody kind of knows us because of that. So those of you who don't know about the Indianapolis Fire Department, so our department's made up of about 1,200 firefighters. We have 42 different firehouses and make up about 15 extrication companies at the time. So during my time in the Indianapolis Fire Department, I did about 8 years ago serve some time in administration in a special ops division. My job in special ops was the rescue coordinator. So my job was to train, educate, purchase and repair extrication equipment for all of my tactical teams. So during that time, I had 15 extrication companies I was in charge of, 10 of them being light tacticals and 5 of them being heavy tacticals. Indianapolis, our response area is about 500 or so square miles of territory. So during this time, when I was up in the office, I got a question, like I said, it was about 8 years ago, and says, hey, what do we do if we have an incident involving an electric vehicle or an alternative fuel vehicle? And at the time, I didn't know anything about it. It's fairly new, and I don't know. So I did a couple things. I tried to educate myself. I first started out with NFPA, became a trainer with them. I took a trainer course with them. That was in the beginning when they only did electric vehicles. Also, I did a class through NFTC, West Virginia University, where they actually did more in-depth training, not only just on electric vehicles, but also alternative fuel vehicles. So I did a couple train courses. I did at least 2 with NFPA, and I did 3 with West Virginia University, including with going to West Virginia for a week long and do a course where we actually went over the vehicles a little bit more in depth, a little bit more of the components and safety features inside the vehicle. During that time, they got tired of seeing me and asking me and say, well, you might as well put you on the payroll. So I started teaching. So about 7 or 8 years ago, I started teaching this course. I've taught multiple classes in California, and I've taught multiple classes in Louisiana as well. And I've also even taught this class at the National Firefighter Academy out in Emmitsburg, Maryland. So I teach not only firefighters, but I teach law enforcement, I teach EMS personnel, tow truck operators as well. There's a lot of information that we try to give out to you guys. And usually, typically, this class that I'm telling you about is usually about a 6 to 7 hour class. During that class, what we talk about some of the safety features built into these vehicles. We talk about a lot of the components that we have to be aware of when we talk about extrication, vehicle fires, things of that nature. So I was not the first instructor that was actually teaching this class. There was they had a service tech guy, basically a guy that teaches mechanics on these vehicles, teaching first responders. Well, if you've been in the fire service long enough, we don't do well with someone teaching us how to do our job that don't have an idea of what our job actually entails. And that's where I came along. So as an instructor, when I teach these classes, not only do I go over some of the things that's in the material, but I also go over a couple of instances that actually happened in my response area in Indianapolis, where we had a CNG truck actually explode with fire crews on scene, where we had a close call incident where we had a firefighter get injured. We had a couple incidents involving like either Tesla or other hybrid vehicles too. So in the fire service or in public safety, we kind of fear what we don't know and what we don't understand. And so what we try to do in these courses is try to educate first responders about these vehicles to take away some of those fears that a lot of people may have when you talk about these vehicles. So like I said, there's a lot of information, and I'm just going to give you just basically a little bit of what we actually provide in these in-person classes. And so like I said, this is supposed to be an informative webinar, and I mean, you're gonna get some information out of it, but obviously we just can't really go over every single thing that this course actually entails. So you'll see me fly through a bunch of slides because like I said, in the fire service, we don't like doing classes where you hear the term death by PowerPoint, right? So you see instructors that will come in and read a PowerPoint to you. To me personally, I hate that because I read, and granted, I am a firefighter, but I do like pictures, but I can read a little bit still too. So when I do these classes, it's not necessarily a PowerPoint instruction. Like I said, I teach these classes and go for real life situations and scenarios that have actually happened, whether it be our department or anywhere across country too as well. And we talk about some of the safety features that these cars that have, and get rid of some of those myths that people have when we talk about dealing with electric vehicles. Because I mean, the biggest thing that came out when it first came out was like, oh my God, I'm gonna get electrocuted, and it's that's like the misconception. I still hear from firefighters across this country that their approach when it comes to hybrid electric vehicles, they're completely hands off. And that's not the way we need to be in the fire department. Like I said, our job, when people call us, we're there supposed to be there to help you. So if we take that hands-off approach, what are we really doing? Why are we even there? So we want to display some of those myths, some of those fears that everybody has. So like the biggest question that first came out when they first came out, electric cars, man, I mean, am I going to electrocute it? Am I going to, if someone wrecks their car, if I come in contact with it, is it going to fry me? Or can I throw water on it if the vehicle catches on fire? And all those questions is answered, in this class. So first of all, no, you're not going to get electrocuted in this car if you come in contact with it, even after the vehicle is wrecked. There's safety features built into these vehicles to help protect first responders and also the public in case something goes wrong. Just like in a conventional vehicle, they have safety features built into those vehicles. So like I said, if it had involved in a collision, it shuts the fuel system down to that car, right? So, there's an accident, you don't have fuel pumping all over the place. So same principle here, they just have a couple extra safety features built into these cars. So one safety feature being fault detection. If a cable becomes damaged due to an accident, or there's the line just comes off for some reason and then the wire becomes exposed, it will shut down the high voltage systems in that vehicle. If there's a collision that is actually detected by this vehicle, it will shut down the high voltage systems. If the airbag gets deployed in these vehicles, it will shut down the high voltage system. So these are systems that are in play to help protect us. Because how many times have we gone on an accident, you pull up and you see a vehicle and it's totally mangled, you look inside and not one airbag is deployed, right? So that happens quite often, but you have other safety features that are actually in that vehicle, such as the collision detection. So obviously, if you have that much damage, then obviously that safety feature will activate and we'll be able to do our jobs inside that vehicle. So let's say we have to do an extrication. Most departments, our SOP is if we had to do an extrication on a vehicle, we disable the 12-volt battery, right? So same principle in this vehicle as do conventional. If we cut the 12-volt battery, it does the same thing in that system as it would in a high voltage system. It will actually shut down the high voltage system as well, because there's what they call a high voltage relay located in these vehicles. So when your vehicle's in drive or it's powered on, you have this relay that actually go in line. And actually, when that relay is in line, your high voltage power is actually going through and it's actually charged, right? So we kill the power to the car. We turn the vehicle off, or we cut 12-volt battery, or it detects that collision, that relay will actually come open and it disengage, taking away that inline source of power. So that's what the 12-volt battery does in this. It opens up that relay and shuts the high voltage system down. Now we talk about the high voltage system. It's completely shut down. Still does not mean that we can cut open into the battery casing or anything like that. There are still high voltage components that would actually store that energy. Just because you kill the power to it doesn't mean the battery is not going to have power. It still does. And also doesn't mean that you can cut the orange cable in these vehicles or pull a service disconnect. I tell people if it's not red or black in these vehicles, we leave it alone. Okay, whether it be orange. Orange is the standard color for high voltage cable or power in these vehicles. So obviously orange we leave alone. Now you will find some intermediate voltage in these vehicles, like such as a yellow cable or blue cable or something else a little different. We treat those just like we would a high voltage cable. You leave them alone. So where we live is like the movie Hitch, right? Where you live is right in red and black. That's your zone. That's your safety zone. And red and black consist of that 12-volt or 24-volt battery when we talk about large passenger vehicles. So I know, like Tyler already talked about identification. How do we identify these vehicles? We do a lot of assumptions in our line of work when we talk about firefighting or, public safety. Say we pull up on a vehicle, and the vehicle's not running, we automatically assume that the vehicle is not running. Right? So that can be a disastrous assumption for us, because if we pull up and say, oh, the vehicle doesn't make a noise, so hey, the power's shut down, we can, go to work as usual. And that's the wrong mentality we have. I always tell people the only assumption we're ever going to make when dealing with any kind of vehicle is we're going to assume that every single vehicle we come in contact with is either a hybrid, electric vehicle, or alternative fuel vehicle until we can prove otherwise. So basically we're making that car identify itself to us, because like I said, if we start assuming a conventional vehicle, there's a couple little safety features, or I'm sorry, not safety features, but components to these vehicles that can be disastrous for us if we make that assumption and wrong. So across the country, we're all dealing with overdoses, right? So we come across these runs all the time, every single day, multiple times a day. One day I actually did a class down in Louisiana a couple of years ago, and my girlfriend, who's a paramedic, she's never been to New Orleans, so I made her take my class. So if you want to come to Louisiana with me, you have to sit in one of my classes. So she did so. She sat in one of my classes, and when I was talking about immobilizing a vehicle, I tell people it's a good practice to immobilize, whether it be conventional, hybrid, or electric. Immobilize that vehicle on every single run you come across it, because say you pull up on that overdose, right? You got an unconscious person slumped over the wheel or laying over the side of the car. What is our first indication? Or what's our first thing we want to do? We tap on the window. We try to get that person's attention to see if there's an alert, right? So let's say you pull up on that incident, you tap on that window, that person becomes alert, and guess what? That person's foot's either going to come off the brake or it's going to push on the gas pedal, and that vehicle's going to want to move, right? And if it's not stabilized, then that vehicle will move, whether it be hitting, a fellow firefighter or even a civilian that's on scene. So I tell people it's good to immobilize that vehicle. So situation, long story, short, I guess. So after my class, she had an incident, back home where she runs in with our fire department quite often, or actually all the time. So that incident had an overdose, middle of an intersection, guy slumped over the wheel, firefighter start tapping on the glass. She goes, hey, why don't you, chalk the wheels, whatever, in case that, car's in park or not in park. So they did so. After they stabilized the vehicle, they knocked on the glass, got the guy's attention, and his first reaction was actually take his foot off the brake, and the car wanted to leave. And so I tell that story just because, believe it or not, women do listen to us. It's a rarity, but it does happen. It's like the Loch Ness Monster, right? So identifying the vehicle we're going on is important because, one, we want to identify that vehicle. We don't want that silent movement because everybody's got a cell phone. Everybody's got a camera on that cell phone. And if something happens, guess what? You're going to be on YouTube and you're going to be all over the country, right? So how do we identify the vehicles we're dealing with? Like Tyler said, a lot of these vehicles do mirror their conventional vehicle counterparts. So how can we tell the difference between the two, right? You look at these two vehicles. If I'm approaching from a 45-degree angle, I can see that on the silver car, there's an emblem there that says hybrid, right? So that may be an indicator that I'm dealing with a hybrid or electric vehicle. Now, the vehicle on the left doesn't have any emblems at all. Does not necessarily mean it's a conventional vehicle. It can easily be a hybrid vehicle, just like the silver vehicle. Because like I said, I've got a blacked out truck, blacked out rims, blacked out tinted windows and everything. So they put chrome emblems on my truck. I'm like, well, that just doesn't look good for me. So I took the chrome emblems off, right? So I want that nice, clean, sleek look. People do that as well. So just because you have a hybrid vehicle or you don't see emblems, don't assume that, hey, it's a conventional vehicle. Because people do take the emblems off the vehicle, and it makes it harder for us to identify. Or the emblem can simply just be knocked off while it was involved in an accident. Okay, so looking at these vehicles, same thing, mirror each other. You can't really tell. So how do we tell if we don't have emblems on it? What are we going to do? We can open up the hood of the car. We can look for orange cables that's underneath the hood of the car. You can look stickers that may say hybrid vehicle underneath, or you can look inside that console. The console may say something that says, how much power is left in a battery. These are other ways to identify. So when we talk about larger vehicles identification, we look at things like on the side, especially if it's a transit bus, guess what? They're going to be proud that that thing is going to be a hybrid or electric vehicle because they're going to plaster down the side. So that's going to be easy for us to identify, especially when we talk about commercial vehicles, that belong to fleet vehicles. They're going to be happy. They're doing their part of going green. So you're going to see those emblems, or you're going to see those stickers, or even wraps that says hybrid or electric vehicle. Okay. Now there are some manufacturers that like to do things aftermarket. So this picture was taken of a 1952 Chevy at the Apex convention. So if I'm pulling up on this, especially 2 a.m, as a first responder, I guarantee you 10 out of 10 first responders are going to look at that and say that's a conventional vehicle. And that's what I'm talking about, that assumption. We make that assumption, it can be disastrous. So we open up the hood of this truck. This is 2 Chevy Bolt motors underneath the hood of this truck. The charging ports are located underneath the hood as well. So there's no indication at all on the exterior of this truck that it says, hey, this is an electric vehicle, right? Remember what I talk about. We want that vehicle to tell us what it actually is, okay? Don't ever assume. Open the hood of the vehicle. Like I said, you open up the hood and you see this, I guarantee you that'd be you'll be a surprise at 2 a.m, like, oh, we never would have guessed that in a million years, right? We would have lost the house on that bet. So like I said, there's aftermarket companies doing these things that a lot of different types of vehicles. Like I said, 1952 Chevy. Who would have thunk it? So let's open up the bed of this truck. This is where the lithium ion batteries are located in this thing. Okay, that's a lot of batteries and a lot of weight to that truck. But like I said, if we don't open things up, you're never going to know what it is that we're dealing with. Like I said, we don't like being surprised. The worst place to learn something about our job is on the scene of an incident, right? We want to try to have at least a heads up. Granted, I learn stuff every single day on runs, but I don't want to be that head scratching kind of learning, especially something I can easily avoid, right? So like I said, I do my due diligence. I try to investigate scene sites, especially as a company officer, because now you're responsible not only for yourself, but also for your crew. It is your job to make sure we try to get as much information as we can to mitigate any kind of situation. So now let's look at this one. This is an aftermarket vehicle that was done to a Mustang. 900 horsepower. So looking at this vehicle, even if I open up the hood of this car, there's nothing to identify it being an electric vehicle. Yes, there's the word lithium written on the spoiler on the front, but what does that really entail? Does that tell me, I don't know, maybe a guy likes lithium batteries? I don't know. You know what I mean? So there's no indicator. So if I look on the other side of this vehicle, most electric vehicles or plug-in hybrid vehicles, they have a charging port usually at in the front of the driver's side door on that front fender. Well, if you look at this one, that charging port is actually at the same spot where you find the fuel port. So now we're going to get to the concept as, man, we're going to start opening up fueling ports now on all these vehicles. Because now if I see this vehicle, the hood's closed, there's no emblems on it, no markings on it, the fuel port's closed, I'm going to assume, especially 2 in the morning, that this is going to be a conventional vehicle, right? Okay, so that's what I'm talking about. This is 900 horsepower. So just imagine you have a person inside this vehicle, you go up there, and you think this vehicle is conventional, you don't hear it running, and suddenly this person hits that gas pedal with someone in front or in the back of this thing. That's going to be a bad day. So like I said, we have to stop thinking or assuming that every single vehicle we go on is conventional anymore, because a lot of these vehicles are not. Okay, municipalities, not only fleets, but also going to electric vehicles. This is a police department in a city just south of Indianapolis. They got a couple, the Teslas Model 3s that runs as police cars. Out in California, there's quite a few police agencies out there as well that are running Teslas as part of their law enforcement vehicles. Even in Indianapolis, we have some of what we call non-pursuit vehicles are running either hybrid vehicles. Even in my fire department, we have some code enforcement that we're driving around Chevy Bolts, the Camry hybrids. So not only fleets are we seeing these, we're also seeing these in municipalities because one, it saves money for a lot of different people, right? And that's what drives everything, especially in our line of work. We have to make budget cuts on a lot of different things. So where can we save money? Fuel costs. We have a large department, right? And we do a lot of traveling. Okay. So what other vehicles? So like everybody's jumping on the bandwagon. This is Lamborghini's version of the electric vehicle. Like me, I'm a big Batman fan. So to me, this should be the next Batmobile because it looks, pretty cool. So I think, like I said, everybody's jumping on that bandwagon, that electric vehicle. This is Ferrari's version of the electric vehicle. 900 horsepower, right? So a lot of power, a lot of torque. These cars are very, very fast. So everybody's jumping on it. So it's not just a fad. This is a thing that's going to stick around. It's going to continue to grow. GM, they've announced by, I think, 2035 or 25, they want to have at least 30 different variations of the electric vehicle with the initial goal to go into 100% electric vehicles. Reason being, it is cheaper to make an electric vehicle than it is a conventional vehicle. There's a lot less moving parts, a lot less components they have to worry about when you talk about engines and all that good stuff, all the parts they have to make. So therefore, your profit margin is going to be a whole lot bigger. So you can make a car a lot cheaper, sell for the same price, and a lot of people are buying them anyway. So therefore, that's what's going to be the driving force in the future. Even Harley Davidson is going to the electric. You got the nice sign. Like I said, Harley Davidson, you think would be the last company or brand that wants to go to any kind of electric, but believe it or not, they've gone there. They even have a patent on the chip, I believe, to give you that Harley Davidson sound. So like I said, there's a lot of people that want to be cool, but not necessarily really want to be could you imagine, rolling up on a Harley Davidson that doesn't make noise with a bunch of other guys that have a Harley? That's got a lot of ridicule. So you have that sound, at least make you, seem cool for a little bit, right? So there's a lot of things out there that tells you what these vehicles are. We just got to go find it, right? Open up that hood, battery locations. It tells you where the 12-volt battery may be located. It tells you where the high voltage battery may be located. So these are stickers you can find also inside these vehicles as well. Charging ports, open them up. Where they located. What does the dashboard tell me? Okay. So we already talked about immobilization. I talked about danger areas, and this goes with all vehicles when you're talking about alternative fuel as well. So we talk about danger areas. You always don't want to approach from the front or the rear of these vehicles for silent movement when we talk about electric and hybrid vehicles. But we also don't want to approach from the sides, like when we start talking about CNG vehicles or propane vehicles, especially if there's a fire. We talk about pressure relief devices as well, because when those pressure relief devices go off, it sounds like a little jet engine, especially with CNG, which is important to know. When we talk about CNGs and propanes, when we talk about the pressure relief devices that's on those types of vehicles, a CNG pressure relief device works as it dumps all the fuel in that system. It doesn't like it. It just, it belches it out. And like I said, all 5 tanks, it can be in single tank activation, or it can run in a series with 5 tanks or even more. And that's important to know when we talk about fires. And like I said, there's videos out there. You can see a CNG transit bus that's actually on fire. You see the torch that blows out on the side, and you'll see this torch, it goes a good distance. So with that torch, you'll see the fuel continues to burn until it's gone. Now, what do we know about propane? We talk about, even in the fire category, we talk about propane and levies and that nature. So when we talk about levies, we know when a tank heats up, it'll burp out that pressure and it stops, right? So when that pressure relief device activates, it goes off until the pressure is equalized and stops, and then it'll keep going on and off until that pressure is actually equalized or the thread is actually stopped. That's where the difference is with a CNG. CNG, there is no stopping unless that system is actually depleted. And it's important to know the difference between the two, especially like talking about vehicle fire situations. Because when we talk about propane tanks, our goal is to throw a lot of water on that because we want to try to prevent that levy from happening, right? But the question is, how do we do that if that tank is inside of a vehicle? And those are good questions. You know what I mean? So if I got a tank in the trunk, how can I get water on it to cool that tank? You may not be able to. That may be something where you evacuate an area. Another question comes up. So what if I've got a vehicle fire and fire's in the engine compartment and the tank's in the trunk? Can I go extinguish that fire? And the question is, absolutely you can. Your job is to try to put out that fire. Our job is to keep it from getting into that tank, right? So if the fuel system, like I said, how many vehicle fires have you actually been on where the vehicle fire is actually caused by the fuel system itself? Even a lot of instances with the CNG trucks or refuse trucks, they catch on fire all the time. A lot of people throw coals in the trash all the time in the dumpster. It happens quite often. But sometimes disaster happens in those trucks when things or steps are not taken properly. When you take a trash truck or a refuse truck, a vehicle fire, that driver, whether it be a CNG or a vehicle, their job is to dump all that fuel, to dump the load, because it's cheaper to clean up the mess than it is to lose a $700,000 truck. So that also helps us out when it comes to emergency responses. The incident that happened in Indianapolis, we did have a trash truck that actually exploded. The driver did not dump the load like he was supposed to, and it slowly heated up the tanks. The tanks failed, and all 5 tanks blew. One tank ended up a quarter of a mile away in a schoolyard, and the other 5 landed up in different areas. It took a couple hours to locate all 5 tanks off this truck. Luckily, it happened in a very early morning where school wasn't in session at the time. It was before kids were actually going to school. So we're quite fortunate in that aspect. So identifying those type of vehicles is important. Like Tyler showed you earlier in those refuse trucks, you look at those steel boxes that are on top and you see those holes. That may be an indicator that's a CNG truck. Or it should be an indicator, hey, that's something different, right? So, look for the blue diamonds that are on the back of these vehicles. It says either CNG, LNG, or you see a black diamond that says propane. Those things may be difficult to find in like 2 or 3 in the morning, or in the middle of an accident, or the vehicle's on its side. But the biggest thing, like I said, we don't assume anything but that the vehicle's either alternative fuel or hybrid electric until we can prove otherwise. So those things that we have to be very conscious of, and that's what we do in this class. We try to help identify. We tell you some of the features of these vehicles to identify, hey, this is what I'm dealing with. I'm dealing with CNG. I'm dealing with a propane. I'm dealing with LNG. Even out in California, they have hydrogen vehicles out there as well. So, there's a lot of different things out there that can actually hurt us if we, don't do our due diligence and educate ourselves on them. So all these vehicles are pretty similar when we talk about disabling. You can just simple as turning that vehicle off will actually shut down either the high voltage systems or the fuel systems in these vehicles, because safety features built into these alternative fuels are similar to our conventional vehicles. Airbag deployment is crash detection. It shuts the fuel system down. Okay. So we also want to disable, chalking the wheels, reaching inside that vehicle, make sure we put it in park. When you talk about large commercial vehicles, it's just like our fire apparatus. You put it in neutral, engage the air brake. And some in a passenger vehicle, you put the vehicle in park, or you look for little buttons inside there on the dash or even on the console that says P, because you're not going to see a P on the paddle shifters or sometimes. So you see these P buttons before you turn the vehicle off. Hit the button and actually put that vehicle in park that way too. Okay. Every fire apparatus has wheel chocks, right? So we can use those wheel chocks on the vehicles that we respond on. In some cases, yes, some vehicles are a little lower to the ground. It's going to be hard to put our wheel chocks underneath those types of those wheels, but that's where 4x4s come into place. If you got 4x4s on your apparatus, especially if you do extrication or if you're part of an extrication task force, those are great tools to use as well. Okay. We talk about disabling the vehicles. This is what I'm talking about. It is same across the board where you're dealing with a hybrid, alternative fuel vehicles. Turn the vehicle off is step number one, right? So if it has a push button, you hit the push button, turn the vehicle off, remove the key fob at least 25 to 35 feet away from the vehicle and disable the vehicle. You don't always have to find a 12-volt battery. But if you just want that warm fuzzy feeling or whatever, just like, we do an extrication run, so we cut the 12-volt battery. That 12-volt battery disables the high voltage system. It also shuts the fuel system down in alternative fuel vehicles too. So remember, like I said, where we live all day long is red and black. 12-volt battery all day long in all these vehicles. It is pretty much the standard operation we do on all of these vehicles. So it's not anything really different that we're doing. It's just something different that we have to be aware of, that we have to pay attention to when you talk about whether it be high voltage systems or the fuel systems on these vehicles as well. Okay. All right. So some secondary methods, you'll see a lot of videos that sit there and say, hey, cut the 12-volt battery, or you can pull the service disconnect on these, and actually you cannot. I tell people if it's orange, you leave it alone, right? So don't pull the service disconnect. And in the classroom, we try to talk about a little bit more in depth of why not to pull a service disconnect. But for this class, like I said, in this, the time frame work with, if it's orange, you leave it alone. Service disconnects are orange, you leave them alone. Only thing we mess with are red and black. Okay. So I think we got like 7 or 8 minutes left. I know I've been going on and on a little bit. So let's see if you might have any questions. If you do, you can unmute yourself or whatever, and we can go from there.
If you have any questions, you can drop that in the Q&A box. And I don't believe we have any at the moment, so you can continue on, but I just want to make sure that that's opened up. The floor is open up for anybody who has any questions.
All right. Yeah, and definitely ask questions. Because like I said, that's the best way we learn in the fire service, right? In public safety is always ask questions. So
I was going to say, we don't know what you don't know.
Right, exactly. So, and then like I said, in trucks and buses, 24-volt battery, same thing, shut down. You try to find the disconnect. Most of the times you're going to find this little red toggle switch. It's going to be underneath the driver's side window of that vehicle. Okay. So I think there we go. But like I said, always ask questions. Like I said, I like coming down to Louisiana. Like I said, I was just down there doing some in-person classes just a month ago. Plan on coming back down, I think, in the springtime again and do some more classes. We're in the midst of talking about California, same as well. I mean, I think we just did 3 webinars for 3 different areas in California just in the last 2 weeks. I've gone to California quite often as well, just because they do have a large infrastructure when we talk about alternative fuels and electric vehicles. Even in Indianapolis in the Midwest, we have the only vehicle we do not have in our area is hydrogen vehicles. We do have LNG, which is UPS trucks. You'll see a lot of those on the roadways. We have CNGs, we have propane. Obviously we have electric, and we also have hybrid vehicles. So this is something that's going to be all over the country. And a lot of people, I've taught a class in Arkansas where it says, we'll never see these vehicles in our area. So we pulled up an app, and because there's apps out there. There's an app for everything, actually. So there's an app out there. We talk about plug share. You got one from the Department of Energy, alternative fuel. And we actually pulled up. There are charging stations in their response area, and they didn't know that. So I tell people, just like in the hazmat, if you're in a hazmat team, We look up a chemical. We use multiple resources when we're looking up a chemical. So same thing here when we're looking at use multiple apps to try to find where these fueling stations or charging stations are located, because one may be updated a little faster than the other. Because I ran into that situation, and even in my response area, I have a lot of charging stations in my response area, and I'll open up both apps, and one will show it and one will not, just because, like I said, some is actually public based where they actually upload and say, yes, there's a charging station here, where the other one is, probably, business based. So utilize every resource you have available to you. Know what's in your area, just because if that 911 calls comes out in a certain area or an address, in your mind, especially as a company officer, even as a backstepper, you're saying, hey, I know what's in that area. That may be this such station. This may be a charging station there. There may be CNG filling station there. So having pre-plans for those before the incident happens is huge, and it's very, very important. So, and also in the classes, we do a lot of scenarios. We pull up a couple different scenarios and we talk about them. I can't sit there and tell you how to handle every situation, because your resources is different than mine. Like I said, if I pull up an extrication run, I'm pulling up with 25, 30 people on the scene right off the bat. A lot of the small departments don't have that luxury. Like I was up in Baker, Louisiana, they have an extrication run. 6 to 7 people is what they get on an extrication run. So therefore I tell people from smaller departments, you got to be better at your job than I am at mine. Because now, like I said, I got 25, 30 people showing up and run, maybe 3, 4 people are working, and the other 20 some people are Monday morning quarterbacks saying they can do it better without giving any insight, right? And that's how it is. So the same thing when you have an incident, someone put an incident up on YouTube or video, everybody can sit there and Monday morning quarterback the situation to death. They're sitting in the recliners at the firehouse and they're going, look at these idiots, So like I said, you never want to learn while doing the job, right? In an aspect where this is the first time you ever heard of it, first time you've ever seen it, because like I said, it delays treatment, it delays care, and also it puts you and your other firefighters at risk. So have a general knowledge or idea what it is you're going into, because like I said, this is something that's not going away. It's going to continue to get bigger, and it's going to continue to grow every single day. And so as you saw the charts, you see that ladder climbing on those bar charts. Firefighters, we love pictures, right? So you can see the picture looks like steps. That means the numbers are getting bigger and bigger. So each year those numbers are getting bigger. So like I said, coalitions are great resources of information. I love working with Clean City coalitions all across the country, because when we do these trainings, they provide vehicles. They also provide information to the fire service. They can tell you how many charging stations are in the area, how many charging stations may be coming, what's the future plans of charging stations or fueling stations. They can tell you how many vehicles and different types of vehicles that's in your response area as well. So coalitions are great sources of resources, great sources of information. Utilize them as much as you can. So actually, with the last couple minutes, I will turn over to our coalitions, and they can give you some more tidbits and give you some more information on how to reach out to them if you do want either more training or more information. Tyler, I give it to you, sir.
Yes, thank you very much. So he covered all of that, which is great. So I appreciate all that information, Chris. That was really good. And again, just a reminder, while we do have a couple minutes left, if y'all do have any questions, you can put in the Q&A, or we can even allow you to actually speak if you'd like to as well. So definitely do put that in there, because as you said, we don't know what you don't know. So unless you give us, unless you ask us questions, then we're just kind of guessing. So there is more in-depth training available. And these slides will be sent out, as well as the recording, so you can look this up later on. But there is more in-depth training, which I believe Chris also mentioned some of that they do go out and actually do in-person training to get some of this information, to go a little bit more into detail and actually show vehicles and that sort of thing. In Clean Cities Coalitions, we act as we're the matchmakers. So if you need information and you don't have it, we will work on getting that to you. So, and also put in an info email address for Louisiana Clean Fuels if you want to reach out to us and ask any questions or need anything there. And Georgia, if you want to drop a link as well, I think we might have your contact in a slide as well. So I don't see any questions. So does anybody have any closing remarks, Chris or Georgia?
I'd like to thank all of our first responders for tuning in today in training, and for all the work that you do to make our communities a safe and place to live. And I want to thank Chris for the wonderful presentation, as well as Ann Vail and Tyler Herman and the Louisiana Clean Cities Coalition for helping to organize today's training. Thank you.
And I want to say I appreciate everyone for coming in. I know, like I said, this is the new norm. I know I don't like sitting in the firehouse watching a video doing training. I like doing stuff on hands-on type stuff. So, but like I said, if you do have questions, definitely reach out. And like I said, hopefully I will see you guys and gals soon when we start opening things up and do some in-person training.
Yep. And I did see the question come up in the chat box about whether this will be available after the webinar is over. And yes, we will be sending out the recording to the webinar. We also been putting them on our YouTube channel as well. There's just Louisiana Clean Fuels YouTube channel. So this information will be available in the future. And then there are there's in-person trainings, so please feel free to reach out. And then we also have that coalition map for clean cities coalitions across the country. If you don't see that, if you're not in one of those regions, still feel free to reach out to the nearest coalition, because honestly, even if you're out of the territory, we'll happily help you out and give you whatever information we can get you. So thank you all for attending. Thank you, Chris and Georgia, for participating. I think this went really well. And I hope you all have a good one.